Amen. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to ask you guys to bear with me this week. You see, us preachers, we sometimes make bigger deals about things than we need to, but I'm going to try and do something a little different this week. You see, every week, the pastor, the preacher, they have this tough job. We need to somehow take centuries of scholarly work on a given biblical text, and we need to boil that work down into 12 or 15 minutes and combine our thoughts and make sure everything can be wrapped at the end with a pretty bow so you can walk out the door with a message. Now, to make matters worse, we're not always sure when we're going to see you guys next. Some of you are busy, or maybe you're a visitor here for the first time. I see some new faces here in the crowd. So it'd be hard for me to let you guys leave without unanswered questions. The only problem with this is that, given an assigned text like the one we have today, we don't necessarily walk out with an answer. Today's text is a wonderful example of leaving us just kind of wondering what's happening. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me. I don't want you to have an answer when you walk out today. Come back next week. Let's hear what the Bible has to say. Now, it's tough, and that sounds like, okay, I'm just trying to get you to come, but it's true. You see, Esther's an interesting book. Have you guys ever read it? Anyone read it? Some people, some hands. Of course, Helen's read it. She's read all the Bible. Until this week, I hadn't read all of it either. It's a short book. It's only 10 chapters long. But it's pretty interesting. Now, it was written roughly 400 to 500 years before the birth of Christ. And during that time, the Jews were already in exile. They'd already been scattered. Babylon had come in, taken the Jews, and scattered them throughout all of the Fertile Crescent. Esther is one of the few books that actually takes place outside of Israel. And interestingly, it's famous for another reason. You won't find a reference to God at all in the entire book. God's name doesn't show up once. Not 10 chapters, you don't see God's name. But somehow it made it into the canon, and I think that's an interesting thing for us to think on. Now, this book hinges on the decision of two women. And both of these ladies go against a royal decree. You see, the king of Persia gets rid of his first queen after she refuses to be paraded in front of the court when the king gets drunk from a party, like she's an object. She says no. And the king gets rid of her, and all the other male leaders, they get together to try and decide who the next queen will be. And they hold a beauty contest of sorts. Enter the gorgeous Esther. She was orphaned at a young age and adopted by Mordecai, who raised her. You see, they were both Jews, and we gather from the text that at this point in time, that was something that shouldn't be talked about, that this was another period of Jewish persecution. In fact, she's told to hide her heritage. And eventually she's chosen by the king to become the next queen. But alas, all is not well. Her uncle Mordecai routinely fails to give the king due credit or to show the proper amount of respect to government leaders, especially a man named Haman, who we read about today. Now Haman becomes so angry that this man won't bow, that he persuades the king to have all of the Jews murdered. Now, we heard about what happened with the royal decree in today's announcement. The Jews are confused. They cast lots, actually, to decide the time. And so they knew this period was coming. Their death was kind of hanging over their heads. And so our reading today ended on a cliffhanger. We're waiting to find out what happens next. Now, if you can put yourself in that anxious, waiting place, you're on your way to understanding what Advent is about. You see, we're just like the Jews in Persia, waiting to find out if we're going to live or to die. Advent is the season of anxious anticipation. You see, we remember the first coming of Christ as a child, born in a manger. And all the while we wait for his second return. Now, most of you are smarter than me, and you're probably saying to yourself right now, but Vicar Tim, our lives aren't really threatened like the Jews. And you would be right, sort of. Romans tells us that for the wages of sin, it's death. You see, we find ourselves every day ignoring the plight of those around us, myself included, living a life of sin. But more on that later. I want to come back to Esther and the fate of so many Jews. And that fate rests in this woman's hands. It's interesting that the text chooses a woman who, in this time, would have no really role in society. And yet the text finds her so important. You see, Esther is a great example for most Christians in the United States. You see, we're a lot like her. The world around us tells us to hide our faith, that showing who we really are will only lead to pain. She's also like us, in that compared to most others, she's doing pretty good. She's the queen after all, right? This country, compared to others, is doing pretty good too. Now, I know this isn't true for everyone, and people were starving and people were struggling all around us, but just bear with me for a bit. You see, Esther had a decision to make, the same decision that falls on us all the time. Will I love my neighbor, or will I serve only myself? She was perfectly situated to intervene on the Jews' behalf. But it would mean that she would have to tell everyone her secret. That she would have to act differently, to stand out. In fact, she might even die because of this. Was it worth it? She had so much to lose. It makes me think of the cheesy quote from the older Spider-Man movies. With great power comes great responsibility. But it's true. Because we too have a great responsibility. How will we respond? Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been following the case of Officer Darren Wilson, the white man who shot Michael Brown, a young black man. The resulting riots and the trial have been all over the news for months. Now, what is a Christian response to something like this? I'm not going to pick sides, because only God and Officer Wilson know what really happened that night. But what I do think is that as a community, we need to stop and think about things faithfully. We need to think through this together. As Christians, as human beings, we should lament the fact that one person had to kill another person. Can we all agree on that? But we have more to think about. We need to remember that the riots and the protests are from different groups, from different people. While some are peacefully protesting, others are jumping on that chance to cause chaos and destruction. And I think we can all agree that that is never the answer. We need to lament the fact that a community has been put in a situation where people of color feel that the only way to make sure that their voice is heard is to take to the streets. Now, some people might think that they're protesting for no reason. The officer was found innocent, correct? Now, even if this is true, it was simply the straw that broke the camel's back. Oppression, racism, and discrimination still exist. And the events of Ferguson are simply small symptoms of a much larger disease. I'll be the first to admit that I have failed to understand the problems of those of a different race. Now, I hope that no one here is naive enough to think that we're all immune to the problems of racism. They exist all around us. You see, we're all guilty. But, like Esther, we've been perfectly placed. A place where we can make sure that those who are not able to live life fully in a community of love and support, that those people can find those very things that we get to participate in here. Jesus Christ said that everyone is our neighbor, that we need to put the needs of our neighbor ahead of our own. I don't know what it's like to live under oppression. You see, I'm a white male from a middle-class family that supported me. What the heck do I know about true pain? I've never been ignored for the color of my skin or looked over because of my gender. I've never known what it's like to be truly hungry or to be abused. But some of you have. And I know that every one of us can think of someone else who has. Don't listen to the news media or to society or any group that tries to dismiss someone else's pain. Yes, people are responding badly, but two wrongs don't make a right. Our dismissal only enables the plight of our brothers and sisters. God is calling us to more, to a better life. Our text today ended without us really knowing what happened. Because it's really easy to look back and remember that everything turns out okay when you look back. But we forget the pain, the uncertainty, and the terror of waiting in the now, of a time when we're really not sure what will happen. And that's what Advent is. We're called to do more. Even as a pastor or a preacher, I fell into that trap of thinking I had this great message to you guys, not realizing that in this position I'm called to share a tough message, things that aren't always easy. Please spend this next week standing up alongside those who maybe you don't know or understand. Remember that Advent is a season of anxiously waiting for Christ. For the wages of sin are death. Will we be saved? Amen.